Have her moved to the general ward. We are not going to spend a fortune on that private room." My son's voice bounced against the hallway tiles, sharp and without a single trace of shame. "I am Evelyn. I am 71 years old, and I spent the last 4 decades building an industrial packaging factory from nothing after my divorce." At the bottom of my worn black leather bag, beneath a silver pillbox and a linen handkerchief, sleeps the foundational document with a clause they never bothered to read. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor marked the beat of my slow breathing. Room 312 at Valley General was a cube with bone-painted walls that tried to be warm, but only managed to broadcast a depressing sterility. The fluorescent ceiling light flickered almost imperceptibly, throwing long shadows over the white sheets made rigid by industrial starch. I was lying at a 45-degree angle with the IV connected to the back of my left hand. The plastic needle irritated my vein every time I moved my fingers, but I had grown used to ignoring physical discomfort. The chest pain that had dragged me into the ER 2 mornings ago had faded, leaving behind a dense exhaustion, as if my bones were stuffed with lead. Outside, the cracked door let in not just the sickly yellow light of the hallway, but every single syllable of the conversation my children were having. They weren't whispering. Maybe they thought I was knocked out on sedatives, or maybe, what was far more likely, they simply didn't care if I heard them anymore. "It's absurd, Derek," said the voice of my daughter Morgan. Morgan's tone always carried that metallic vibration of impatience, as if the whole world owed her an apology for making her wait. "Basic insurance doesn't cover the private suite for more than 48 hours. If we leave her here, they're going to bill the difference directly to the company's operating account. I already talked to administration." "That's why I'm telling you," Derek replied. His voice was deeper, but it dragged the same nervous urgency. "Have them take her down to the ground floor. There are empty beds in the general ward. It's the same thing. They'll medicate her just the same. There is no sense in throwing money out a window with a street view. Throwing money. Spending." Those were the words floating in the aseptic air of the clinic. I closed my eyes, and for a fraction of a second, the smell of disinfectant morphed into the deep, sour scent of industrial glue and corrugated cardboard. Memory dragged me 35 years into the past, to the damp warehouse on the outskirts of town where it all began. It was the winter of '89. The divorce with William, Derek, and Morgan's father had just been finalized. William was a man of grand speeches and zero stamina. When the first economic recession hit the modest distribution company we were trying to build, he simply packed his bags. I remember the morning he left. There was no screaming, no broken plates. He stood in the doorframe of our rented house in his gray wool coat and told me, "I wasn't born to drown in debt, Evelyn. I'm leaving you the machinery. It's the least I can do." The machinery was 2 rusted die cutters and a stack of unpaid bills. I was 36, with 2 grade school kids demanding new sneakers and spotless uniforms, and a freezing warehouse. I didn't cry. Pride has a very specific texture. It feels like an iron rod driven straight through your spine, forcing you to stand upright when everything around you is begging you to collapse. For the first 5 years, I slept 3 hours a night. I learned how to calibrate the machine blades, how to negotiate with craft paper suppliers who looked at me with mockery because I was a lone woman in the trade, how to haul bales until the palms of my hands grew calluses that no lotion could ever erase. Morgan and Derek grew up watching my back hunched over drafting tables, or my hands stained with black ink. They never forgave my absence, even though my absence was the exact price of their comfort. They wanted the mother who baked cookies and waited at the school gates, but they thoroughly enjoyed the private schools, the senior trips, and the designer clothes that the factory slowly started to pay for. When they complained that I wasn't at the dinner table, I didn't apologize. I didn't make excuses. I served the food, let silence be my only answer, and went back to the shop floor. That was my mistake. Believing that the example of hard work was enough. Believing that someday they would understand that every drop of my sweat was an insurance policy for their future. The memory of William leaving faded, replaced by a much sharper image dated 15 years later. It was 2004. The factory was no longer a freezing warehouse, but a fully compliant industrial plant with 50 employees. I had decided to buy our first automatic folder gluer from Germany. It was a monstrous investment that required mortgaging my own home, the very house I had finished paying off with blood and sweat. I remember dinner that Sunday. Morgan was 22, finishing her degree at an obscenely expensive private university. Derek, at 24, was playing entrepreneur with the allowance I gave him every month. I announced the purchase of the machine with a pride that threatened to burst my chest. I expected, perhaps in my infinite maternal naivete, a smile, a congratulations, some acknowledgement of the family legacy growing. Instead, Morgan dropped her fork onto her porcelain plate with a hard clatter. "Does that mean the Europe trip this summer is canceled?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. Derek backed her up almost instantly, crossing his arms. "Mom, you can't strip our capital like that. We were planning to upgrade the cars. That machine is a technical vanity project. We could just keep outsourcing the gluing." Strip our capital. They spoke in the plural, as if they had forged that capital themselves. I looked at them from the other end of the table. The food turned to ash in my mouth. Instead of explaining to them that this German machine would triple our production capacity and secure their future dividends, I stood up in silence, gathered my plate, and went to the kitchen to scrub it. That silence, that inability of mine to demand the respect they owed me, was the fertilizer that fed their contempt. They got used to me being the invisible engine, the inexhaustible safe that required zero emotional maintenance. A floor nurse, a young woman with heavy bags under her eyes and her hair tied in a rushed bun, walked into the room to check my vitals. Her hands were cold when she took my pulse, but her eyes held genuine compassion. "How are you feeling, Miss Evelyn?" she asked in a whisper, checking the IV bag hanging from the metal pole. "I've had better days, sweetheart," I answered, forcing a slight smile, "but the heart keeps beating." She jotted something down on the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. "The doctor came by early. Your cardiac markers are going down. That's a good sign. You just need absolute rest and to avoid stressful situations. In this quiet environment, you'll recover soon." I nodded, knowing full well that the peace of this room was about to be auctioned off by my own children. The nurse stepped out silently, leaving me alone again with the electrical hum of the ward. That was when the screech of the hinges yanked me entirely back to the present. The door swung wide open. Derek walked in first, adjusting the knot of his Italian silk tie. Morgan followed close behind, typing frantically on her cell phone, her cashmere coat resting over her shoulders like a cape. They stopped at the foot of my bed. I kept my face utterly impassive. My breathing didn't change. I looked them in the eyes, one by one, with the exact same neutral expression I used when inspecting a batch of defective boxes on the production line. "Mom, it's so good you're awake," Derek said, rehearsing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He rubbed his hands together, a tell he always had when he was about to lie or deliver bad news. "We just talked to the doctor on call. He says your progress is favorable. Your enzyme panels came back better." "I'm glad," I replied. My voice sounded raspy, dry from the lack of water, but firm. I didn't add anything else. I let the silence drop over them like a weighted blanket. I knew silence made them crawl out of their skin. People who live on excuses cannot stand the void of unreciprocated conversation. Morgan shoved the phone into her designer bag and took a step forward, slipping into the role of the pragmatist. "The issue, Mom, is that the billing department at this hospital is a disaster. There was a glitch with the health insurance policy. Turns out this premium room isn't covered for extended stays given your specific diagnosis." A lie. I paid the premium policy myself, deducted straight from my personal account, and I had never missed a payment. So, Derek jumped in quickly to prop up his sister's story. "Just to avoid unnecessary paperwork and some absurd out-of-pocket costs that the company really shouldn't be absorbing this quarter, we authorized them to move you to the East Wing. It's the General Pavilion. You'll be great there. There are nurses around all the time. It's much more dynamic." "To the general ward," I translated, without altering the volume of my voice. "It's a general observation area," Morgan corrected, furrowing her brow, clearly annoyed by my lack of tact. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. It's just for a couple of days until you're discharged. There is no sense in spending a fortune on luxury when the factory needs liquidity for the new production line. We have to be rational. You always taught us to optimize resources, right? Optimize resources. Now I was a poorly optimized resource, a cost center that needed to be trimmed. I didn't move a single muscle in my face. I didn't scream at them that the company, the very one paying their exorbitant salaries as executive directors while I was still the one signing the loan guarantees, belonged to me. I didn't remind them that Morgan's handbag or the watch peeking out from under Derek's cuff cost more than a week in this room. No, if they expected me to beg, to throw a tantrum, or to try and move them by appealing to a child's love, they were standing in front of the wrong woman. My pride does not allow me to beg for respect from the people I raised. I understand, I said simply. Derek blinked, visibly relieved by the lack of resistance. He had come armed for a pitched battle and found flat terrain. Perfect. I knew you'd get it, Mom. Always so practical. I'm going to head down to admissions to sign the transfer papers. The orderlies should be up in about 20 minutes to move you. I'll walk with you, Morgan said, turning on her heel without even stepping closer to touch my hand or fix my blanket. I have to make a logistics call before the bank closes. See you downstairs, Mom, Derek added, half his body already out the door. We'll visit you tomorrow afternoon in the new pavilion. The door clicked shut with a metallic finality. Silence reclaimed the space, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor and the soft hum of the air conditioning. I stared at the ceiling for several minutes. I felt a pressure in my chest, but this time it wasn't my heart failing. It was a cocktail of crystallized disappointment and absolute mental clarity. They had drawn the line. They had appraised me, weighed me, and measured me, and they had decided that my comfort during a moment of profound vulnerability wasn't worth the investment. Slowly, I began to move. Every fraction of an inch required a conscious effort. I slid my right hand, the one free of needles, toward the edge of the mattress. Pain radiated from my ribs up to my neck, a physical reminder of my 71 years and the accumulated stress of a life devoted to holding others up. Careful not to pull the IV line in my left arm, I leaned on my elbow and pushed my torso up. The bed creaked slightly. The room did a slow spin before stabilizing in front of my eyes. On the nightstand, next to a plastic water pitcher and a cup with a bent straw, rested my bag. It was a large, heavy bag, made of a leather that had lost its shine years ago, but kept its structure perfectly intact. I never liked delicate purses. I needed something that could hold folders, checkbooks, cardboard samples, and the keys to the plant. It carried the scars of time, tiny scratches on the corners that told the story of thousands of cab rides, bank visits, hours spent waiting in clients' lobbies. It was a walking archive of my working life. I reached out and hooked my fingers around the leather strap. I pulled the bag onto the bed, letting it drop onto my lap with a dull thud. The familiar touch of the material anchored me to the present. I unzipped the metal zipper, which glided smoothly. Inside, the order was meticulous. I pushed aside my coin purse, my reading glasses case, and the pill box where I kept my blood pressure medication. My fingers searched the bottom, feeling the lining until they found the secret compartment secured by a small snap button. I popped it open. There it was, a thick manila envelope, folded neatly in half. The paper felt cold to the touch. I pulled it out slowly, feeling the weight of the pages inside. This wasn't just any document. This was the very architecture of the reality my children believed they lived in. They paraded around the factory offices acting like owners. They had handed out business cards with grandiose titles. They had swapped the boardroom furniture for glass tables and imported ergonomic chairs, assuming that the transition of power was a done deal, sealed by the simple force of habit and my advancing age. But businesses aren't inherited through inertia, and certainly not through arrogance. The document was structured in 3 parts. The first established that the corporation Derek and Morgan thought they ran was simply a management shell. The second detailed that all fixed assets, the industrial warehouses, the state-of-the-art machinery, the fleets of trucks, and even the commercial trademark, were in my exclusive name and had been leased to the company under a bailment agreement. The third part, the golden clause, the one my lawyer had insisted on drafting with maximum legal severity, established that the bailment could be revoked unilaterally, immediately, and without any right to compensation, if the owner considered that the administrators were acting to her moral, physical, or financial detriment. A single piece of paper, a single set of signatures registered before a notary public and filed in the commercial property registry. A piece of paper that turned the executives in expensive suits into precarious tenants of an empire they did not own. I unfolded the manila envelope over the white sheets, smoothing the edges with the palm of my hand. The first page peeked out, bearing the notary seals and the signatures in blue ink. They thought my silence during their complaints about the cost of the private room was submission. They believed that, like an old machine on the factory floor, I no longer had the power to operate, that I would simply accept being shoved into the cheapest corner of the warehouse. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the filtered hospital air. With my free hand, I grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand. I dialed Arthur's direct line. Arthur was more than a lawyer. He was the legal architect of my defensive wall. He had known my kids since they were spoiled brats and had watched them mutate into ruthless executives. Arthur's law office, good afternoon, his secretary answered. It's Evelyn. Put him on, please. It's urgent. There was a click, and Arthur's measured voice came on the line. Evelyn, I heard you were admitted. How is that heart doing? I could picture Arthur taking off his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. To the general ward, Evelyn? You are coming off a coronary crisis. That is absolute negligence. If you want, I'll call hospital administration right now and intervene. I'll authorize the payments from your personal account. No, Arthur, I cut him off, my voice slicing the air like one of my die-cut blades. You are not going to call anyone. I'm going to let them take me downstairs. I'm going to let them sign the transfer order and let them believe they've protected their dividends. Arthur caught the nuance immediately. What do you need me to do, Evelyn? If we execute the revocation clause today, your kid's company is left with zero assets first thing tomorrow morning. It's total asphyxiation. I know, I said, staring dead at the wall. I spent my entire life building a shelter so they wouldn't freeze, and now they throw me into a hallway to save a few dimes. The shelter closes today. Find me in the general ward of the East Wing. I'm leaving right now. Give me 30 minutes, Arthur stated. I hung up. I slipped the manila envelope back into my bag and zipped it shut. With calculated movements, I began to gather my few belongings. My toothbrush, my comb, my slippers. I didn't want to leave a single thing in this room to indicate I had ever been here. I wanted to erase my footprint from the VIP zone, just as they were trying to erase me from their priority list. The sound of rubber wheels squeaking against the polished floor of the hallway interrupted my thoughts. The orderlies, they were coming for me. The door swung open, and two young men in green scrubs walked in pushing a wheelchair. Miss Evelyn? One of them asked. We have a transfer order for the general pavilion. I've been expecting you, I replied, my voice perfectly serene. Help me up, please. The journey from the private suite down to the ground floor general ward was a literal and metaphorical descent. As the numbers on the elevator's digital panel ticked down, the atmosphere around us shifted. The smell of ground coffee from the suite area faded away, replaced by the dense stench of ammonia and boiled food. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, revealing the controlled chaos of the East Wing. There was no silence here. There were nurses running, monitors beeping relentlessly, and families slumped in hard plastic chairs. They wheeled me into a massive rectangular room, divided by green fabric screens. There were at least 20 beds in the space. The air was stale. They stopped me next to bed number 14, located right by the swinging doors where the cleaning staff came in and out. It was the worst possible location. Here we are, the young man said, helping me stand up to transfer to the stiff mattress. I sat on the bed, keeping my back perfectly straight. Despite the paralyzing fatigue, I looked around. To my left, an old man slept hooked up to a noisy oxygen tank. To my right, a young woman sobbed quietly. This was the place my own children had banished me to in order to protect their profit margins. I rested my bag on my knees, feeling the rectangular shape of the manila envelope through the worn leather. The trap was set. They themselves had placed me in the exact position to detonate it. I just had to wait for Arthur to walk through those double doors with his black briefcase. I checked the wall clock hanging above the nurse's station. 5 in the afternoon. Banking hours were over. Morgan and Derek's corporate day was wrapping up, and my silent reign was about to rise from the ashes of this general ward. The air in the general ward was thick, heavy with a warm humidity that smelled like noodle soup and iodine. From my spot in bed 14, I had a front row seat to the frantic coming and going of the East Wing. On my left, the older man coughed with a wet, rhythmic cadence, while his heart monitor flashed a yellow warning light. On my right, separated only by a faded green curtain, a woman muttered prayers in a non-stop whisper. This was the dumping ground for the people who didn't matter, the dead archives of Valley General, and according to my kids, my new temporary home to protect the company's cash flow. I adjusted my pillow, which was thinner than a wafer, and leaned my back against the metal rail. The chest pain had receded into a dull echo, but the IV line in my left hand kept throbbing with every heartbeat. A short nurse, walking fast in a wrinkled uniform, stopped at the foot of my bed. She read the dry erase board with my name scribbled halfway on it. "Miss Evelyn," she said in a raspy voice that gave away far too many double shifts. "I'm Nurse Lucy. Time for your blood pressure check and 6 o'clock meds." "Go right ahead, Lucy. Do your job," I replied, extending my right arm. As she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, her eyes scanned my face, perhaps evaluating my level of alertness. Most patients in here had a vacant stare, sedated by pain or resignation. I, on the other hand, had my eyes locked on the swinging doors down the hall. "Your pressure is a bit high for someone who just got out of the coronary unit," Lucy noted, loosening the valve. She scribbled the numbers on her notepad in rushed handwriting. "You should try to relax. Stress is your worst enemy in these beds." "I am more relaxed than I have been in 30 years, I promise you," I said, flashing a dry smile that didn't touch my eyes. Lucy handed me a little plastic cup with 2 pills and refilled my water pitcher. I thanked her with a nod. When she walked away, I sank back into my thoughts. Morgan and Derek thought they were punishing me. They thought that by dragging me out of the private suite, they were teaching me a lesson in corporate humility. What they didn't understand was that I had spent half my life in warehouses with tin roofs that leaked in the winter, eating cold sandwiches sitting on bales of cardboard while I calibrated machinery. A hospital bed, no matter how uncomfortable, wasn't a punishment to me. It was simply a tactical staging ground. The swinging doors burst open. Cutting through the sea of white and green scrubs was a figure who looked entirely out of place. Arthur was wearing his flawless navy blue Italian suit, a gray silk tie, and carrying his inseparable black leather briefcase. He walked with his back straight, dodging medication carts and avoiding the gaze of anxious relatives with the precision of a man used to navigating rough waters without getting his shoes wet. He spotted me immediately, and his jaw tightened. As he approached my bed, the disgust on his face became painfully obvious. "Evelyn," he said by way of a greeting, stopping next to the rusted metal nightstand. "This is unacceptable. Even by your kids' standards, this is a low blow that borders on cruelty." "Keep your voice down, Arthur," I warned him in a firm whisper. "The walls in here are made of fabric, and there are a lot of ears. Grab that plastic chair and sit down." Arthur eyed the rickety chair with suspicion, but he obeyed. He rested his briefcase on his knees and let out a heavy sigh. He took off his tortoiseshell glasses and wiped them with a cloth handkerchief. "I spoke to the hospital's medical director on my drive over," he muttered, leaning in toward me. "He confirmed your kids signed a voluntary discharge from the suite. They argued the company insurance didn't cover the extension, and they preferred not to compromise family assets. Evelyn, I can reverse this in 10 minutes. I make one wire transfer from your investment account, and they move you up to the best room on the top floor." "You are not reversing anything," I cut him off, resting my good hand on the cold leather of his briefcase. "If you move me back up, they'll think I surrendered, that I paid my own ransom so as not to be a nuisance. I need them to believe they won this little skirmish. I need them to feel safe." Arthur looked me in the eyes. We had worked together for 25 years. He had drafted the very first lease agreements when the factory was nothing but a divorced mother's desperate project. He knew my tone. He knew that when my voice dropped in volume and my words became surgical, there was no going back. "Did you bring what I asked for?" I stated. It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. The metal latches of his briefcase made a sharp click as they popped open. From inside, Arthur pulled out a thick, dark blue cardstock folder and placed it on my lap. "Here is the master trust document and the notarized notice revoking the bailment," he explained, opening the folder. The pages rustled with that heavy authority that only high bond paper possesses. Exactly as we stipulated 3 years ago. The memory of that November afternoon crashed into my mind with overwhelming clarity. It was the day I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my children were not just ungrateful, but dangerously reckless. 3 years ago, Derek had tried to leverage the property titles to our heavy machinery, the very folder gluers and die cutters I had paid for with years of insomnia, to secure a high-risk loan. He wanted to invest in a digital logistics platform that promised astronomical returns. Morgan, always an accomplice when quick money was on the table, had forged a board resolution to authorize the transaction. I caught them by pure luck, checking the head accountant's emails. When I confronted them in the boardroom, there were no apologies. Derek had looked at me with that unbearable condescension and said, "Mom, the world changed. You don't make money printing cardboard boxes anymore. You make it moving capital. You have to let us modernize the company or we're going to drown in obsolescence." That afternoon, I didn't yell. I didn't fire them because a public scandal would have damaged the factory's reputation with our suppliers. Instead, the very next day, I sat in Arthur's office for 5 hours. We designed a parallel structure. We transferred absolutely all physical assets, the warehouses, the truck fleet, the design patents, and the machinery, into a blind trust controlled exclusively by me. The operating company, the one Derek and Morgan ran as directors, was hollowed out from the inside, turned into a mere shell that leased the assets from the trust through a bailment agreement. When I handed them the paperwork to sign, I told them it was an extreme tax optimization strategy to protect the company from labor lawsuits. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so eager to get back to their corner offices with panoramic views, that they signed on the dotted line without reading the unilateral revocation clause. They never realized they had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. "If you sign this now," Arthur's voice pulled me back to the present, dragging me out of the memory. "The bailment is revoked effectively immediately. Tomorrow, first thing in the morning, I will send the process servers to the plant. Your kids will show up and find out the operating company has no legal right to use a single machine, a single truck, or even the trademark. They won't be able to bill, they won't be able to produce." "Total collapse," I murmured, tracing the edge of the page where the original signatures were printed. "It is absolute asphyxiation, Evelyn," Arthur insisted, searching my face for any trace of doubt. "The banks will freeze their credit lines the second they see the company has no assets to back its operations. Suppliers will demand cash up front. In 48 hours, Derek and Morgan will be sitting on the floor of a factory they can't turn on. Are you absolutely sure you want to take it to this extreme? They are your children." "My children just shipped me to the back of a hallway to save the price difference on a room, Arthur. They didn't do it because the company is going bankrupt. They did it because to them, I am already an unnecessary expense, a piece of old furniture in the way." I looked up from the paperwork and scanned the room. The woman in the next bed was still praying. The smell of cold soup hung in the air. "Hand me your pen," I ordered. Arthur pulled a fountain pen from his inside pocket and handed it to me. I was just about to press the metal nib to the paper when my cell phone, tucked into the side pocket of my bag, began vibrating frantically. I stopped. I looked at the screen. It was Derek. I held up a hand to tell Arthur to wait. He quickly closed the folder and slid it under his briefcase, hiding it from view. I answered the call. "Mom," Derek's voice sounded rushed, with the noise of city traffic in the background. "I'm so glad you answered. Morgan and I are heading back to the hospital right now. We had a little hiccup with some urgent paperwork." "What kind of paperwork, Derek? I thought your corporate day was over and you wouldn't be back until tomorrow," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, masking the coldness washing over me. "It's just a formality, Mom. A bank thing. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't go to sleep." He hung up before I could respond. I lowered the phone and looked at Arthur. "They're on their way up here," I informed him, smoothing the sheet over my legs. "Put the briefcase away. Go down to the cafeteria on the first floor and wait for my call. I don't want them to see you here. If they know you're involved, they'll try to mount a legal defense ahead of time." Arthur nodded, grasping the gravity of the situation. He grabbed his briefcase, buttoned his suit jacket, and vanished through the swinging doors just as fast as he had arrived. I was left alone again, surrounded by the hum of the monitors and the murmurs of the sick. I used those minutes to steady my breathing. I felt the adrenaline pumping through my veins, a feeling I hadn't experienced since the days I negotiated life or death contracts with paper suppliers. My bruised heart held up, sustained by the ironclad will not to let myself be trampled. Exactly 12 minutes later, the ward doors banged open. Morgan walked in first, taking short, fast steps, her designer boots clicking loudly against the scuffed linoleum. Derek followed right behind her, clutching a brown leather folder under his arm. They both wrinkled their noses in near unison as they breathed in the ward air. They approached my bed, dodging a cleaning cart an employee was pushing down the center aisle. "My God, this place is so depressing," Morgan muttered, stopping a few feet from my bed, being careful not to let her coat brush against the metal railing. "They should really put in better exhaust fans. It smells like stagnant sickness." "It's the general ward, Morgan, not a spa," I replied, lacing my fingers together in my lap. "To what do I owe this surprise visit?" "I was told you had to optimize resources at the office." Derek forced a tight smile and stepped forward, opening the leather folder he was carrying. "Mom, sorry to barge in like this. I know you need to rest, but an unforeseen issue popped up with the new production line. The German supplier for the spare parts is demanding a 40% advance by tomorrow morning, or they cancel the shipment for the complementary machinery. I thought the operating account had plenty of liquidity. That's why I was moved here, isn't it? So as not to impact cash flow," I said, using their own words as tiny needles. Morgan rolled her eyes, losing patience. "We have liquidity, Mom, but it's tied up in 30-day treasury bills. We can't liquidate it without paying an absurd penalty." Derek talked to the bank, and they approved a short-term bridge loan. "It's a routine procedure. We just need you to sign the guarantee." "The guarantee?" I raised an eyebrow, keeping my face deadpan. Derek pulled out a stack of printed papers and a blue pen from his pocket. "Yeah, since the trust is the title holder of the physical assets, the bank requires your signature as a personal guarantor. It's just a formality, Mom. The loan pays for itself next month with the pending invoices from our big clients. There is absolutely no risk." He held the papers out to me. I didn't raise my hands to take them. I let him hold them in midair, suspended between us while the silence thickened. I stared hard at the documents. I knew exactly what they were. A personal guarantee. They wanted me to put my signature, and therefore my entire private estate, on the line as a shield to cover a financial miscalculation on their part. They had blown through the operating cash, probably on year-end bonuses for their executive buddies, or remodeling yet another office, and now they had no way to pay for the actual machinery that kept the factory alive. "Let me see if I understand this," I said, my voice slow and deliberate, making sure every syllable echoed in the space between us. "You two decided a mere 2 hours ago that my comfort in a private room was an excessive luxury the company couldn't afford. You shipped me to this general ward, where the man next door coughs up phlegm every 5 minutes and there isn't enough privacy to even cry. And now you come running to ask me to sign a personal guarantee for millions of dollars to save your skin with the Germans." Derek swallowed hard. The tight smile vanished from his face. "Mom, don't mix things up," he tried to justify himself, lowering his voice a bit when he noticed Nurse Lucy walking by. "The room thing was a strictly administrative decision. This is business. The company needs to keep operating. If we don't sign this loan today, we lose the exclusivity contract with the Germans." "You always taught us to separate emotions from finances, Mother," Morgan chimed in, crossing her arms, adopting that defensive posture that made her look like an angry, spoiled child. "Don't be vindictive. Sign the paper. The bank courier is waiting downstairs in the car. We don't have all afternoon." That was the final straw. That word. Vindictive. As if my refusal to be used was an emotional whim, an old woman's tantrum. They looked down at me from their heights, wearing clothes the factory paid for, holding state-of-the-art phones the factory paid for, demanding that the invisible safe swing open one more time on command. "I am not signing," I said. The sheer simplicity of the phrase seemed to baffle them. Derek blinked several times, pushing the papers a little closer, as if I simply hadn't seen the dotted lines well enough. "What, Mom? It's not an option. It's a formality." "I'm not signing, Derek, and I'm not discussing it either." "You are being completely irrational," Morgan exploded, raising her voice loud enough that several heads in the ward turned to stare at us. "If you don't sign, the production line stops. We are going to lose clients. You are sabotaging your own company over stupid pride." "The company is not mine, Morgan. You two are the executive directors. You collect the million-dollar salaries. You make the administrative decisions. Solve your liquidity problem. Use your imported cars as collateral. Mortgage your weekend homes. I am just a cost center you just trimmed, and cost centers do not sign bank guarantees." Derek's face flushed red. The vein in his neck pulsed. Suddenly, the facade of the successful executive crumbled, exposing the scared boy who had no idea how to run a real business. "You're going to sink us," Derek whispered, grinding his teeth. "Nobody sinks if they know how to swim," I replied, holding his gaze without blinking. "Let's see how good of a swimmer you really are." Morgan grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back. She was furious, breathing heavily. "Leave her, Derek. She's sedated and doesn't know what she's doing. Her mind isn't fit for business anymore. We'll talk to the bank manager. We'll offer a corporate promissory note. We'll solve it ourselves, like we always do. Let's get out of this disgusting nursing home." They turned around and walked briskly toward the exit. They never looked back. The swinging doors closed behind them, leaving a trail of expensive perfume mixed with ambient iodine. I stared at the empty space they had just occupied. My hands, resting on the sheet, were trembling slightly. It wasn't out of weakness. It was from contained rage, from the profound sadness of confirming that there was no salvation possible for them. They had crossed the point of no return, and so had I. I felt for the cell phone in my lap. I dialed the number. "Evelyn," Arthur answered on the first ring. "Come up." 2 minutes later, Arthur walked through the door again. His face was dead serious. He had pieced the situation together, likely crossing paths with my kids in the hallway or the parking lot. He didn't ask questions. He walked up to the bed, placed the briefcase on the sheets, and pulled out the blue folder. He opened the documents, the fluorescent ceiling light falling directly onto the notarized paper. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time, uncapping the fountain pen. "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life, Arthur. They think the problem they have tomorrow is with a bank. They don't know that tomorrow, when they pull up to the plant, the electronic locks aren't going to open." I took the pen. The cold metal gave me a strange sense of grounding. I positioned the document over the rigid surface of the folder. I found the line that read "Signature of Trust Settlor/Title Holder." I pressed the nib down. The blue ink flowed over the heavy paper, tracing the letters of my name with a firmness that defied my 71 years and my damaged heart. I wrote my name with the exact same determination I had when I signed my very first promissory note to buy cardboard 35 years ago. I finished the signature and handed the pen back to Arthur. "It's done," he said, checking the signature and packing the document away with extreme care. "We'll initiate the notification protocol first thing in the morning. It will be delivered by a process server to the factory reception with a copy to the company's legal address. As of 8 a.m. tomorrow, the bailment is dissolved. Make sure the plant security guards get the order not to let them pass the main gate," I added, leaning back slowly onto the thin pillow. "The assets belong to me. I don't want them trying to take a single computer or a single file out of there." Arthur nodded, snapped the latches on his briefcase, and stood up. "Get some rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He said goodbye with a soft but firm handshake and left. The general ward carried on with its usual rhythm. The man coughed, the woman prayed. Nurse Lucy pushed the medication cart. I stayed right there in bed 14, surrounded by strangers. I felt the plastic of the mattress against my back and listened to the squeak of wheels in the hall. My children had abandoned me in this dark corner, believing they were stripping me of my power. They were completely ignorant to the fact that power had never resided in the private room, nor in the remodeled corner offices, nor in the tailored suits. Power was in the silence, in knowing exactly which strings to cut, and in having enough patience to wait for them to tie the noose around their own necks. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the stale hospital air, and for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. Tomorrow, the Empire would wake up to a new owner, ready to collect her debts. Dawn in the general ward at Valley General didn't arrive with the softness of natural light, but with the harsh crackle of fluorescent tubes flickering on in sequence. It was 6 in the morning. The smell of industrial bleach mixed with the sickeningly sweet aroma of boiled oatmeal that the kitchen staff was starting to hand out from stainless steel carts. To my left, the old man with the oxygen tank had stopped coughing, replacing the spasm with a steady wheeze that set the room's tempo. I had been awake since 4, my eyes glued to the water stains on the ceiling, mentally reviewing every single clause of the document Arthur had to be delivering at that very moment. I didn't feel fear. I also didn't feel that corrosive guilt that is supposed to choke a mother when she decides to clip her own children's wings. What I felt was a glacial clarity, an absolute lucidity, that seemed to have numbed the pain in my chest far better than the intravenous painkillers. Nurse Lucy appeared down the center aisle, pushing the med cart. She had fresh bags under her eyes, a purplish tint that betrayed a sleepless night. She stopped at the foot of my bed, checked the dry erase board, and then looked at me. Her expression shifted slightly, going from automated routine to genuine curiosity. "Miss Evelyn," she murmured, stepping closer to take my pulse. "You've got better color today. Did you manage to sleep at all with all this noise?" "I slept as much as I needed to, Lucy," I answered, extending my arm so she could wrap the cuff around it. "The noise in this ward is honest. I prefer the honesty of a stranger's pain over the lies of a silent VIP room." Lucy squeezed the rubber bulb, inflating the cuff around my left arm. Her eyes locked on the gauge dial. Her eyebrows shot up a millimeter. 120/80, she announced, releasing the air with a long hiss. "Textbook pressure. It's incredible. Yesterday when they brought you down from the suite, your numbers were through the roof. Anyone would think this place is actually good for you. It's not the place, sweetheart. It's having made a decision. Indecision is what destroys your heart. Certainty, no matter how brutal, repairs it." Right as Lucy was handing me the little plastic cup with my morning pills, my cell phone tucked in my leather bag on the nightstand started vibrating. The metallic buzz against the rusted metal cabinet echoed like a combat alarm. I looked at the screen. 7:15 a.m. The caller ID showed a name I was expecting to see. Isaac. Isaac was the plant manager. A 60-year-old man with hands weathered by glue acid and a loyalty that couldn't be bought with corporate bonuses. He had started working for me 25 years ago, unloading paper rolls on the night shift, and I had personally taught him how to calibrate the first die cutter we ever bought. I asked Lucy for a moment with a wave of my hand. She nodded understandingly and moved on to the next bed. I swiped the screen and held the phone to my ear. "Morning, Isaac. Tell me you're on the right side of the fence," I greeted him, keeping my voice low but firm. "Morning, Miss Evelyn." Isaac's voice sounded rough, filtered by the morning wind and street static. "I'm inside. On the right side, just like you ordered. The process server Mr. Arthur sent just got here. Very serious guy in a gray suit. Brought 2 servers with him. Did you secure the main gates? Brand new solid steel padlocks on all 3 entrances, Miss Evelyn. The morning shift security guards already have the directive. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out. The electronic system for the office doors is locked out from the main server too." I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the massive blue corrugated facade of my factory. The loading dock, the paved parking lot, everything sealed tight. "Are my kids there yet?" I asked. "Mr. Derek's Audi just pulled up," Isaac reported. I could hear the distant sound of an impatient car horn through the line. "And here comes Miss Morgan's SUV. They're getting out." The server is intercepting them on the sidewalk before they even reach the security booth. "Don't hang up, Isaac. I want to hear." There was a rustle on his phone's microphone, followed by the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel. Isaac was walking up to the perimeter fence. Suddenly, Morgan's high-pitched, outrage-laced voice sliced through the air, traveling all the way to my ear from across the city. "What is the meaning of this? Open the gate immediately. Isaac, I'm talking to you. Open this fence or you are fired." The process server's voice cut through the screaming, monotone, professional, and relentless. "Sir, ma'am, please. I am the notary public appointed by the legal trust that holds title to these assets. I am proceeding to formally notify you of the absolute and unilateral revocation of the bailment contract that linked the trust to your management company. As of this act, you have no legal authorization to enter the premises, operate the machinery, or make use of the facilities." "That bailment is untouchable," my son yelled, his voice cracking from a mix of fury and sheer panic. "My mother is hospitalized, she's sedated. You are taking advantage of a sick old woman to pull an illegal move. Isaac, bring the keys right now." Isaac's response was a balm to my ears. He spoke with the heavy calm of a man who knows exactly where he stands. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Derek, but my boss is Miss Evelyn, and Miss Evelyn's orders were crystal clear. The factory is closed to the management company. If you try to climb the fence, the guards have orders to call the cops for trespassing." "It is our company, you miserable piece of trash," Morgan shrieked. The sound of her heels clicking on the asphalt gave away that she was pacing in circles. Desperate. "We pay your salary." I'm going to ruin you. I'm calling my lawyers and I'm putting you all in jail. My mother is senile. She doesn't know what she's doing. Senile. The word floated in the stale air of the hospital ward, vibrating against my eardrum. Morgan had used it as a spontaneous insult, but I knew it was much more than that. It was a plan I had uncovered 6 years ago, which had been the true catalyst for this silent war. The memory assaulted me with violent clarity, pushing me out of the hospital and dragging me back to the winter of 2018. I had just undergone a total right knee replacement. The recovery was brutal. I was confined to the ground floor of my own home, sleeping in a hospital bed set up in the study, relying on an aluminum walker to take a single step. Derek and Morgan had insisted on moving in with me temporarily to take care of me. In practice, that meant they occupied my living room sofas, drank my single malt scotch, and ordered takeout on my credit card, while a hired nurse handled my actual needs. It was the third night after surgery. I woke up in the middle of the night with a dry throat. The nurse was dozing in a nearby armchair. I didn't want to wake her. I slid out of bed. I gripped the rubber handles of the walker and started making my way down the hardwood hallway. Every step was a dull agony, a whip of pain shooting from the titanium in my joint up to my hip. As I got closer to the library, I saw the double doors were cracked open. A sliver of yellow light cut into the dark hallway. I heard ice clinking against glass. It was them. I stopped, holding my breath, leaning all my weight onto the walker so the rubber feet wouldn't squeak against the varnished floor. "We can't keep waiting, Derek," Morgan was saying. Her voice didn't have the high pitch of a tantrum, but the calculating coldness of a board of directors. "Rehab is going to take her months, and when she gets back to the factory, she's just going to keep stalling expansion. She refused to approve the sale of the South Warehouse, says it's the company's historical heritage. It's absurd." "I know," Derek replied. The sound of a Zippo lighter flicking open and shut accompanied his words. "I talked to Dr. Sterling, the neurologist from the club. He told me that with the pain meds she's on, plus a few documented episodes of confusion backed by the nurse's testimony, we'd have enough grounds to request a cognitive evaluation." "A conservatorship?" Morgan asked, and I could hear the ambition vibrating in that single word. "Partial commercial incapacitation," Derek corrected. "We don't need her declared completely insane, just enough for a judge to grant us absolute control over the signatures and the assets. If we do it now, while she's doped up in that bed, in 2 months we sell the warehouse, outsource production to China, and we keep the clean margin. It's for her own good," Morgan stated, with a cynicism that froze my blood faster than the cold floor beneath my bare feet. "She's worked too much already. It's time she rests and lets us manage what is ours by right." I stood there, frozen in the shadows. I didn't feel anger in that moment. I felt a desolation so profound, so vast, it threatened to swallow me whole. My own children, my flesh and blood, the creatures I had shredded my hands and my youth for, were sitting in my library drinking my liquor, plotting how to strip me of my dignity and my life's work under the guise of a legal guardianship. They saw me as an obstacle, as a wounded animal that needed to be put down financially. I didn't walk into the library. I didn't scream at them. I didn't shed a single tear. I pivoted the walker with millimeter precision and went back to my bed in absolute silence. The very next morning, I called Arthur. I told him I needed to set up an impregnable blind trust. That day marked the construction of the guillotine that today, 6 years later, was finally dropping. Isaac's voice on the phone pulled me back to the general ward. "Miss Evelyn, you still there?" "I'm right here, Isaac. They just got back in their cars. Mr. Derek was on the phone, screaming at somebody about a bank. They peeled out. What do we do now?" "Hold the line. Nobody gets in. If they bring the cops, show them the notarized notice. It's a civil matter. The police cannot force entry." "Good work, Isaac. Your year-end bonus just tripled." I hung up. I looked at the wall clock above the nurse's station. 8 a.m. The banks had just booted up their internal systems, even though public hours didn't start until 10. Derek wasn't going to give up that easily. He was going to try and execute the bridge loan he had negotiated yesterday to fake liquidity and pacify the German suppliers. I propped the pillow behind my back and waited. I knew exactly what was going to happen. At 9:15, my phone rang again. This time the screen displayed a landline number I knew by heart. It was the main branch of Commerce Bank. I answered on the first ring. Evelyn. The voice on the other end sounded tense, nervous. It was Gerald Vance, the corporate account manager. I had known him since he was a lowly teller 20 years ago. Hello, Gerald. I was expecting your call. Evelyn, I am so sorry to bother you while you're in the hospital. I heard about your heart scare, but I have an extremely delicate situation in my office right now. Derek is sitting across from my desk. I can imagine. He's trying to execute the bridge loan for the German parts. Gerald coughed uncomfortably. Exactly. The problem is, the bank system just threw a red flag. We received a notice from the Commercial Property Registry half an hour ago. It indicates that your kid's management company no longer holds the bailment on the fixed assets. Derek is assuring me it's an administrative error, that you signed a verbal authorization last night, and that the assets are still backing the operation. He is demanding I release the funds immediately, appealing to our long-standing relationship. I smiled. An icy smile, completely devoid of humor. Derek was cornered, and he was trying to use the trust I had built over decades to save his own neck. Gerald, I said, using the tone of voice I reserved for the most ruthless negotiations. Put the phone on speaker. I want my son to hear me. There was a moment of silence, followed by the distinctive click of the speakerphone. The background noise of the bank office filled my earpiece. You're on speaker, Evelyn. Gerald confirmed. Mom! Derek's voice cut in immediately. He sounded frantic, desperate. Mom, tell Gerald the notary document is a misunderstanding. Tell him the guarantee still stands. If they don't wire this money in the next hour, we lose the exclusivity contract. The company goes bankrupt. I took a deep breath. The ward air, heavy with iodine and sickness, filled my lungs. Derek, I pronounced his name with lethal calm. The trust has revoked the bailment. The company that you and your sister run no longer has assets. It has no machinery. It has no headquarters. And as of this exact moment, it has no credit. There is no misunderstanding. You're crazy, Derek roared. I could hear his fist slam against Gerald's mahogany desk. You can't do this to us. It's our life. It's my factory. Derek, you two were just the tenants, and I just evicted you. I directed my attention back to the manager, ignoring my son's furious panting. Gerald, listen to me very carefully. The management company has no financial backing. If you release a single dime of that credit line based on empty promises or supposed authorizations from me, I will instruct my lawyers to sue the bank for corporate fraud and fiduciary negligence. I signed nothing yesterday, I am signing nothing today, and my personal estate remains completely out of reach for that company. Was I clear? The silence in the bank office was absolute for 3 long seconds. When Gerald finally spoke, his tone had shifted. He was no longer the family friend. He was the banker protecting his branch. Completely clear, Miss Evelyn. The credit application is denied due to lack of collateral. Transaction canceled. No, Gerald, wait, Derek begged, but his voice was cut off abruptly when the manager ended the call. I lowered the phone and set it on my lap. The trap had snapped shut completely. The mechanism had executed flawlessly. I had pulled the rug out from under them, knocked down the walls around them, and vaporized the money they thought they controlled. The cardboard empire they had built on my back had just collapsed under the weight of a single piece of paper. But the war wasn't over. They weren't going to just sit on their hands. If Morgan had suggested declaring me senile 6 years ago over a real estate whim, now, cornered and penniless, they were capable of trying any desperate legal maneuver. I needed to get out of this bed. I needed to be physically present on the battlefield. At 10:30, the floor attending, Dr. Quinn, walked into the general ward followed by Lucy. He was a young man with quick movements and tired eyes, checking his digital tablet as if looking for magic answers on the screen. He stopped by my bed and read my vitals off the board. Miss Evelyn, good morning. Your enzyme markers have dropped considerably, and this morning's EKG shows a stable sinus rhythm. However, our cardiology department protocol requires you to remain under observation for at least another 48 hours, especially considering yesterday's transfer. Dr. Quinn, I interrupted him, pushing the thin white sheet off my legs and sitting on the edge of the mattress. I appreciate your dedication, but protocol doesn't pay my bills. I am leaving today, right now. The doctor frowned, taken aback by my authoritative tone. Patients in the general ward didn't usually give orders. Ma'am, I understand the environment here isn't ideal, but leaving now is a major medical risk. If you suffer another coronary event outside this facility, the consequences could be fatal. I cannot authorize a discharge. I'm not asking for your permission, doctor. I am informing you of my decision. Bring me the AMA form, against medical advice. I will sign it and assume all legal liability. If you don't bring it to me in 5 minutes, I will get up and walk to the exit. And then the hospital will have a PR nightmare for illegally detaining a patient. Quinn looked me in the eyes and realized I wasn't bluffing. He saw the woman who had brought unions and suppliers to their knees, sitting on a hospital bed with an IV in her hand. He sighed in defeat. Lucy, prep her liability waivers and pull the IV, the doctor ordered, turning on his heel. Make sure it's noted in her chart that she was warned of the risks. When the doctor walked away, Lucy approached with a steel tray. Her hands were gentle as she peeled back the medical tape and slid the needle out of my left vein. She pressed a cotton ball over the tiny puncture and applied a round band-aid. You're made of iron, aren't you? The nurse whispered, with a mix of mild reproach and deep admiration. Iron rust, Lucy. I'm made of corrugated cardboard. I look fragile, but if you fold me the right way, I can hold tons of weight without breaking. Lucy smiled and handed me my leather bag. From inside, I pulled out the clothes I had worn into the ER 2 days ago. A pair of straight-cut navy dress pants, a cream silk blouse, and my black leather flats. They weren't flashy clothes, but they carried the unmistakable imprint of command. I stood up carefully. My legs shook for a split second, but I gripped the bed rail until the dizziness passed. With Lucy's discreet help, I took off the humiliating open-backed hospital gown and got dressed. The fabric of my own clothes brushing against my skin felt like armor. As I buttoned the cuffs of my blouse, I felt the helpless patient vanish, leaving behind only the founder, the absolute owner. I grabbed my bag, now lighter without the weight of the document that was already doing its destructive work, and slung it over my shoulder. Thank you for everything, Lucy, I told her, pulling a $100 bill from my wallet and sliding it into the pocket of her scrubs. Buy yourself a good coffee when your shift ends. You earned it. Before she could refuse it, my phone buzzed one more time. A text message from Arthur lit up the screen. The message was short, precise, and alarming. Evelyn, Derek, and Morgan aren't backing down. They brought 2 police cruisers to the factory gate. They are accusing the guards of trespassing and hijacking corporate assets. The process server is trying to hold them off, but the situation is escalating fast. We need your physical presence to disavow them in front of the captain, or they're going to force entry. I pocketed the phone. The Cold War was over. Hand-to-hand combat had just begun. I took one last look at the general ward. The old man coughed. The nurse pushed her cart. The fluorescent light flickered. My kids had thrown me into this pit, hoping I would wither away in silence, hoping my spirit would break under the weight of the indignity. How little they knew me. I straightened my back, ignoring the lingering twinge in my chest. I walked through the swinging doors with a steady stride, leaving the smell of iodine and defeat behind, marching straight into the eye of the hurricane I had unleashed myself. I was going to take my factory back, and I was going to do it looking them dead in the eye. The cab smelled like synthetic pine and stale tobacco, a mix that churned my empty stomach, but I forced myself to keep my eyes locked on the gray asphalt rolling by the window. The driver, an older man in a worn-out wool cap, didn't ask questions when I gave him the address of the industrial park on the outskirts of the city. He just dropped the meter and hit the gas. I rested my head against the cold glass. Every pothole translated into a dull ache in my chest, right where my heart had betrayed me 2 mornings ago. Yet the paralyzing fatigue that had kept me chained to bed 312 and then to bed 14 in the general ward was gone. In its place, a cold, dark fuel was pumping through my veins. I was going to reclaim what was mine, and I wasn't going to let a bruised muscle stop me. The urban landscape slowly shifted. The tall glass and steel buildings of the financial district, where my kids rented satellite offices to play global entrepreneurs, gave way to lower, grayer, more utilitarian structures. The massive zinc-roofed warehouses appeared, the smoking chimneys, the heavy cargo trucks maneuvering down streets that were too narrow for them. This was my world. the world of deafening noise, of cellulose dust, of grease-stained hands. As the cab cruised down Workers Avenue, a memory ambushed me again, taking me back to a torrential rainy morning exactly 5 years ago. It was the day Derek and Morgan decided the factory needed to enter the 21st century. I remember I was reviewing delivery manifests in my old mezzanine office when a crew of technicians in reflective vests invaded the ground floor. Derek was walking ahead of them, pointing at the heavy sliding iron gates that secured the perimeter. I walked up to him, wiping my hands on a rag. "What is going on here?" I asked him. Derek looked at me with that condescending smile he always deployed when he found my technological ignorance endearing but annoying. "We're installing a biometric security system, Mom," he replied, pulling out his latest model smartphone. "Electronic locks, fingerprint access, gate control from an app, no more rusted padlocks and heavy keys. It's archaic. As of today, Morgan and I control who comes in and who goes out right from our phones." I watched as the techs dismantled the massive hardened steel chains and solid brass padlocks that had protected my machines for decades. Derek laughed, joking with the contractors about how his mother probably still kept her money under the mattress. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene in front of the contractors. I waited for them to finish their modern installation with its little green LED lights flashing on the door panels. But that very afternoon, after my kids drove off in their imported cars, I called Isaac into my office. I ordered him to gather up all the heavy padlocks, the chains, and the manual deadbolts, and stash them in a hidden drawer under the workbench in the maintenance shop. "Power fails, Isaac," I told him that afternoon, looking him dead in the eye. "And electronic systems can be hacked or remote locked by any idiot with a phone. But solid steel only answers to the physical key you hold in your hand. Keep them. Someday we're going to need to lock these doors the old-fashioned way." Isaac nodded, understanding without asking questions. That day had arrived, and the irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as the cab turned the final corner onto the factory's main street. Derek bragged about controlling the company from a digital cloud, but he had forgotten that the gates surrounding the machines were made of physical iron, anchored to physical earth. From 200 yards away, I could see the harsh flash of blue and red lights spinning on the roofs of 2 county police cruisers. They were parked at an angle, partially blocking the street in front of my company's blue corrugated facade. The illuminated logo my kids had commissioned, a minimalist, pretentious design that replaced the old hand-painted sign, glowed faintly under the pale morning light. A small crowd had formed in front of the main perimeter fence. There were at least 20 people gathered. I recognized the gray coveralls of the morning shift workers, who were watching the scene from the opposite sidewalk, smoking in silence, unsure if they should go home or wait. In the center of the chaos, right in front of the imposing 10-foot-tall iron gate, were my children. Derek was waving his arms frantically, screaming at a high-ranking police officer who maintained a rigid, defensive posture. Morgan, wrapped in a camel cashmere coat that cost more than the 6-month salary of any of my operators, was holding her cell phone high, recording the scene and screaming legal threats into the air. On the other side of the fence, standing as steady as an old oak tree, was Isaac. He was flanked by 2 company security guards. The thick steel chains and brass padlocks Derek had scoffed at 5 years ago were tightly wrapped around the thick iron bars, binding the 2 halves of the gate with an unbreakable solidity. A few feet from the gate, keeping a safe distance from the screaming match, the process server Arthur had sent stood clutching his briefcase with both hands, observing everything with the neutrality of a statue. I asked the cab driver to stop about 60 feet from the cruisers. I paid the fare in cash, waved off the change, and opened the door. The freezing morning air hit my face, heavy with the familiar smell of diesel and damp cardboard. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. My legs protested at the first step onto the uneven gravel, but I straightened my spine, forcing my vertebrae into alignment. I walked toward them. My black leather flats barely made a sound, but my presence seemed to alter the atmospheric pressure of the street. One of the operators, a young kid from the folding section, spotted me first. He quickly pulled off his cap and gave me a slight nod. The murmuring among the workers died instantly. The silence rippled outward like a wave on water, crossing the street until it reached the cops. The officer arguing with Derek turned his head to see what had caused the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Finally, Derek and Morgan turned around. The look on my son's face was a masterpiece of desperation colliding with disbelief. His eyes went wide, and his mouth hung half open, an excuse dying on his lips. He was pale. His Italian suit was wrinkled, and the knot of his tie hung loose and crooked. Morgan slowly lowered her phone, as if the device had suddenly turned to lead. They stared at me as if they were watching a ghost rise from the grave, and in a corporate sense they were. "Mom!" Derek exclaimed, breaking his paralysis and jogging the few feet separating us. He tried to grab me by the arms, but I stopped dead in my tracks and shot him a glare so sharp it forced him to take a step back. "What are you doing here? You should be in the hospital. You're sick. You just got out of the coronary unit." I didn't answer him right away. My gaze swept over his shoulder, evaluating the situation at the gate. Isaac saw me, and his posture visibly relaxed. The process server nodded in my direction. Only then did I turn my eyes back to my son. "I came to supervise the optimization of resources, Derek," I said, my calm voice slicing the cold air like a scalpel. I used the exact phrase he had used yesterday to justify moving me to the general ward. I heard there was a liquidity problem at the door of my factory. Morgan stomped forward in her tall boots, pushing her way past the cops. Her face was twisted with rage and panic. "It was you," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You orchestrated this whole circus. You are out of your mind. Officer, do not listen to her. My mother has mental lapses. She is under the influence of powerful sedatives. Isaac is taking advantage of her senile dementia to hijack our machinery." I ignored my daughter's tantrum and walked straight up to the officer in charge. He was a burly man in his 50s, a captain's badge shining on his chest. His nameplate read Captain Miller. I looked him in the eye with the absolute tranquility of someone who has the law, reason, and history on their side. "Good morning, Captain Miller. I am Evelyn, the sole owner of this property, the warehouses, and every single machine sitting behind those fences." Captain Miller looked at me, then at Derek and Morgan, and adjusted his tactical belt, visibly confused by the situation. "Ma'am, your children requested our emergency intervention. They reported that a group of mutinous employees, led by that man," he pointed at Isaac, "locked the gates with unauthorized padlocks, blocking access to the legitimate directors, and hijacking the management company's assets. They were demanding I give the order to cut the locks with bolt cutters." I opened my leather bag with slow, deliberate movements, making sure everyone present, especially my kids, saw my hands were steady and free of tremors. I pulled out my ID and handed it to the captain. "The padlocks were placed under my direct orders, Captain, and there is no hijacking of assets. What you are looking at is a legal eviction." I gestured toward the man in the gray suit. "This gentleman is a notary public. He holds the notarized document revoking the bailment agreement that linked my private estate to my children's company. The document was legally executed, registered, and served this morning. As of 8 o'clock sharp, Derek and Morgan's management company has zero legal right to enter this property. In the eyes of the law, they are trespassers attempting to force entry onto private property." End quote. The process server stepped forward and pulled a certified copy from the blue folder he carried. He handed it to Captain Miller. "It is exactly as the lady says, Captain. Here is the supporting documentation. Trust, title holder of physical assets. Unilateral revocation clause exercised by the trust settlor. Everything is in order. The police have no jurisdiction to force entry on behalf of these individuals, as this is a civil dispute resolved via notary, and the legitimate owner is present ratifying the act." Miller quickly read the first page of the document, checked the official seals, and handed me back my ID with a respectful nod. Then he turned to my kids, and his expression hardened. "Folks, you made me mobilize 2 units for a report of trespassing and hostage-taking at a factory, when in reality you're in the middle of a property dispute with your own mother. This paper is clear. You do not have the right of way." "No, no, wait!" Derek yelled, grabbing his head with both hands. "Mom, please stop this. The bank canceled the bridge loan an hour ago. If we don't get in there right now and send the samples to the Germans, they cancel the supply contract. We go bankrupt today. You can't do this to us. It's our company. We are the directors." I turned slowly to face him. The freezing breeze messed up my hair, but I didn't flinch. "You are directors of an empty shell, Derek. A bank account and a pretty logo. That is all you built. I spent 35 years swallowing paper dust, mortgaging my house, and sleeping 3 hours a night to buy those machines. When you decided to ship me to the cheapest corner of the hospital so you wouldn't spend a fortune on me, you reminded me that there is no room for sentimentality in business. You asked me to be rational. You asked me to optimize resources. Morgan, her makeup smeared by tears of frustration, tried to grab my arm, but Captain Miller stepped in, extending a firm hand to keep her back. You are ruining our lives because you didn't want to pay for a clinic room, Morgan sobbed, losing every last layer of her ruthless executive veneer, revealing the spoiled little girl she had always been. You are bitter. We worked for years in this company. I raised my voice, not to yell, but to ensure my words rang out with the clarity of a brass bell, making sure every operator on the opposite sidewalk heard the truth. You didn't work, Morgan. You collected million-dollar salaries, while I signed the guarantees that kept you afloat. You used my factory as an endless ATM to finance your trips, your cars, and your whims. Yesterday, you evaluated me and decided I was an unnecessary expense, a cost center that needed to be eliminated from the private suite and dumped in the general ward to protect your cash flow. Well, as the founder and sole owner of this cost center, I decided to cut the biggest, most toxic expense I had. The silence that followed my words was absolute. The only sound was the static hum of the radio in the police cruiser. The morning shift workers, who had suffered through years of my kids' insults and arrogance, exchanged looks loaded with a deep, silent satisfaction. Someone in the back of the group nodded. Captain Miller turned to his officers. Boys, kill the sirens. There's no crime here. It's a civil eviction. Then he looked at my kids coldly. Folks, I'm going to ask you to clear the entrance. You cannot remain here obstructing the gate of a private property. If you insist on disturbing the peace, I will have to detain you. Derek stumbled backward, clumsily tripping over the curb. He was breathing heavily, as if the air had suddenly turned too thick. He looked at the massive facade of the factory, then at the steel padlocks, and finally, he locked his eyes on me. His expression went from pleading to pure, venomous rage. You think you won, don't you? Derek hissed, his voice trembling with contained fury. You took the iron, you took the warehouse, but the entire operating system, the passwords for the logistics servers, the international client databases, the tokens for the offshore accounts, all of that is encrypted on the management company's servers. I have the digital keys. Mom, you don't even know how to turn on the main server. Without us, you can't ship a single box tomorrow. You just kept an inoperable museum of scrap metal. I looked at him without moving a single muscle in my face. The threat was real. Of course it was. They had monopolized the digital infrastructure for the past 5 years, convinced that isolating me from technology was the best way to keep me marginalized. They believed my ignorance regarding servers and encrypted passwords was the perfect containment wall, the ultimate bargaining chip they had left. I turned toward the fence, completely ignoring Derek's declaration of war. I gave Isaac a slight nod. The old plant manager pulled a massive ring of keys from his belt. He didn't touch the heavy padlocks blocking the main gate. Those would stay closed. Instead, he walked over to the small, reinforced iron pedestrian door built into the side of the wall, a door Derek and Morgan considered beneath them to use. The key turned with a harsh metallic grind, the glorious sound of heavy metal yielding to its rightful owner. Isaac pushed the door open, clearing a narrow path. Welcome home, Miss Evelyn, Isaac said, stepping aside with profound respect. I stepped across the threshold without looking back. I heard the dull thud of the iron door shutting behind me, immediately followed by the turn of the key and the click of the deadbolt sliding into place. On the other side of the wall, out in the cold street, my children were left alone, surrounded by impatient cops and operators who were already starting to walk toward the side entrance to begin their shift under my command. I had reclaimed the fortress of steel and brick, but Derek's words echoed in my mind to the rhythm of my own damaged heart. The physical empire belonged to me again, but the factory's digital brain was still held hostage by 2 desperate executives who were willing to burn it all down. Before accepting defeat, I stopped in the middle of the loading yard. I breathed in the smell of industrial glue, and I prepared my next move. The real cleanup wasn't over yet. The loading yard was wrapped in the gray mist of 8 a.m. The cold crept up the hems of my pants, but every breath of freezing air that filled my lungs acted as a reviving tonic. Behind me, The heavy iron gate remained shut, an impassable barrier separating my legacy from the greed of those who shared my last name. Isaac walked beside me, half a step behind, maintaining that quiet respect we had forged over decades of uninterrupted work. We walked into the main nave. The noise was overwhelming, a constant roar of electric motors, heavy gears, and conveyor belts that made the polished concrete floor vibrate. To any outsider, this was deafening chaos. To me, it was the heartbeat of a steel core, much stronger and more reliable than the bruised muscle still beating weakly in my chest. The morning shift operators were at their stations, but the tension was palpable. Heads turned as we walked by. The machinists, covered in blue coveralls stained with grease and ink, put out their cigarettes and stood up straight. They knew something tectonic had just happened out on the sidewalk, but nobody dared ask. There was no need. My presence there, walking without the entourage of tight-suited executives that usually flanked my kids, was the only official statement I needed. We headed for the iron staircase leading up to the mezzanine. Up there, overlooking the entire plant, were the offices. Derek, in his delusion of corporate grandeur, had ordered the old masonry walls torn down to install massive tempered glass panels. He had claimed the corner office, the one with the best light, filling it with imported minimalist furniture and flat screens. My old office, a space paneled in dark pine that I had varnished myself back in the 90s, had been relegated to the status of a dead archive and photocopy room. Isaac opened the door to my old office. It smelled like confinement, cellulose dust, and stale coffee. The oak desk was still there, buried under boxes of printer paper and carelessly stacked folders. "Give me a minute, Miss Evelyn. I'll send a couple of the boys up to clean this mess," Isaac said, rolling up his sleeves, visibly embarrassed by the state of the room. "Don't worry about the dust, Isaac. I've worked in worse conditions," I replied, walking up to the desk and shoving a cardboard box to the floor with a heavy thud. I sat in my old swivel chair. The cracked leather creaked, welcoming me back. "We have more pressing problems than cleaning. Close the door." The old plant manager obeyed. He took off his cap and stood in front of the desk, wringing the fabric in his weathered hands. "Mr. Derek threw out a very heavy thread out there, Miss Evelyn," Isaac muttered, lowering his voice as if the glass panels had ears. "He said he's holding the system hostage, and he wasn't lying. All the billing, the contacts for the German suppliers, the codes for the international accounts, all of that runs through the cloud server he and Miss Morgan contracted last year. They changed all the passwords. If we can't access the system to ship and bill, the factory is dead in the water anyway, even with the machines inside." I leaned back in the chair, lacing my fingers together in my lap. Derek had always underestimated my ability to adapt. He thought that because I couldn't navigate his smartphone apps as fast as he could, I was completely ignorant of how the architecture of my own business functioned. "Isaac," I said, keeping my tone flat and calculating, "go down to the basement, go to the old archive, and find Valerie. Tell her to bring her paper trash." Isaac frowned in confusion for a second, but then a slow, knowing smile spread across his lined face. He nodded and practically jogged out of the office. Valerie was the head of accounting. She was 65, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and had been working with me since the days when we did the ledgers by hand in lined accounting notebooks. When Derek took operational control, his very first move was trying to fire Valerie, calling her obsolete. I stepped in, used my veto power, and managed to keep her on the payroll, though Derek exiled her to the darkest corner of the basement, forbidding her from touching the new digital management system. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Valerie walked into the office. She walked with a bit of a limp from arthritis, but her eyes burned with fierce intensity. In her arms, she carried a stack of 3 massive, hard-bound ledger books covered in black faux leather and a worn leather briefcase. "Miss Evelyn," Valerie greeted me, dropping the heavy books onto my desk with a loud smack that sent up a cloud of dust. "What a joy to see you out of that hospital, and what a joy to see you sitting in that chair." "The pleasure is mine, Valerie. Tell me, did you do what I asked you to do 2 years ago, when those idiots decided to digitize everything onto a cloud we couldn't control?" Valerie smiled, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. She flipped open the first ledger. The pages were filled with ruler-straight columns, with numbers and names jotted down in flawless calligraphy. "Of course I did. Derek forbade me from touching the new system, but the new system was hooked up to the ground floor printers. For the last 24 months, every single time the management company onboarded a new client, modified a price, or updated the contact info for international suppliers, I printed the backup logs in the middle of the night. I transcribed all of it. You have the account numbers, the direct phone lines, the pending balances, and the exact inventory, right up to yesterday's close at 6 p.m. right here. We don't need their cloud, Miss Evelyn. We have the entire sky written on paper. I ran my hand over the open page, feeling the texture of the ink on the paper. It was a masterpiece of silent insubordination. Derek thought power resided in alphanumeric passwords, ignoring the fact that true information always leaves a physical trail, if you know where to keep it. Excellent work, Valerie. Your salary doubles starting this month, I stated, closing the book. But we still have the operational issue with the machines. The consoles on the German die cutters are linked to the internal network. If Derek blocks the network from his phone, the machines shut down via security protocol. Valerie nodded and looked toward the door. That's why I asked Isaac to bring someone else. Come in, Finn. A young kid, no older than 25, shuffled into the office, visibly intimidated. He was wearing a black Rock Band t-shirt and baggy pants. Finn was the IT support tech Derek had hired to fix the printers and swap toner cartridges, always treating him with absolute contempt. Miss Evelyn? Finn mumbled, staring at the floor. Step forward, son. I don't bite. I pointed to a chair across from the desk. Valerie tells me you understand how my kid's digital toy works. Derek threatened to block our access and paralyze the logistics servers. Can he do it? Finn swallowed hard and gave a timid nod. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Derek has master admin credentials on the remote platform. He can log in from his cell, encrypt the cloud databases, and send a kill signal to the factory routers. If he does that, the machines won't receive the cutting orders and they'll auto-lock. And how do we stop that, Finn? Speak plain English, like you're explaining how an engine works to your grandmother. The kid seemed to relax a bit at my direct tone. He leaned forward. It's simple, ma'am. Mr. Derek controls the front door from the outside because he has the digital key. But the physical servers, the big computers that actually process the data, are right here, inside the cooled room on the second floor. If we go right now and physically cut the fiber optic cable that connects those servers to the street ISP, we blind him. He'll try to send the kill switch from his phone, but the command will never reach our machines because there won't be any external connection. We go dark, isolated. Exactly. Isolated, but operational. Once we cut the cable, I can plug my laptop directly into the main server through a local port, wipe Mr. Derek's remote access credentials, and set up a closed internal network. The machines will run perfectly. They just won't be connected to the internet. And with Valerie's books, we can manually punch in today's production orders. I smiled. It was the exact same logic I had used to lock the gates. Physicality always defeats virtuality when you control the territory. Finn, you have exactly 15 minutes to get up to that room and cut that cable. Do not unplug it gently. Use wire cutters. Make it crystal clear the bridge has been blown. Then wipe the system. If you can get the German production line running before noon, you are the new head of IT for this company. Finn's eyes lit up. He sprinted out of the office with an urgency I had never seen him display under my kid's management. I was left alone with Valerie. The tension in my chest had completely faded, replaced by the cold adrenaline of reclamation. I looked at the old landline phone, a heavy plastic push-button relic sitting on the desk, a survivor of all of Derek's aesthetic remodels. Valerie, find me Mr. Bauer's direct number, the German machinery rep in Munich. No, not the Buenos Aires branch. The direct line to Germany. Valerie quickly flipped through her ledger, dragged a finger down the right column, and read off a string of numbers. I dialed slowly, listening to the international ringtone. The time difference meant it was early afternoon in Germany. On the third ring, a deep voice with a thick German accent answered in English. Mr. Bauer's office, good afternoon. Mr. Bauer, this is Evelyn calling from the States, founder of Southern Industrial Packaging. There was a silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a chair leaning back. When Bauer spoke, he did so with unmistakable relief. Evelyn, what a surprise! Your son Derek informed me last week that you had permanently retired due to severe mental health issues. We were on the verge of canceling the parts shipment for the new folder gluer. Your son was demanding a renegotiation of the maintenance margins that we found unacceptable and highly unprofessional. My mental health is in perfect condition, Mr. Bauer, and my son Derek is no longer part of this company. He has been completely terminated from both operations and management. As of this minute, you are back to dealing exclusively with me. The original guarantees of our contract remain backed by my personal estate, just as we have done for the last 15 years. I heard Bauer let out a contained laugh. That is the best news I've had all quarter, Evelyn. Working with those boys was like trying to reason with spoiled children playing in a casino. They never understood that in this industry, we sell reliability, not mobile apps. The spare parts leave on a cargo flight tonight. Consider the credit line extended. Thank you, Bauer. I deeply appreciate it. I hung up the phone. Valerie was looking at me with an expression of quiet triumph. The digital siege was broken. The international threat was neutralized. In less than an hour, the grand empire my children thought they held together with their smartphones had crumbled before the undeniable power of accounting ledgers, a pair of wire cutters, and the respect earned through decades of keeping my word. The following weeks were a whirlwind of relentless activity. The transition wasn't without its chaos, but it was a productive chaos, the kind of mess that precedes a deep clean. Finn managed to stabilize the internal network in less than 2 days, rebuilding the databases from Valerie's meticulous records. The operators, freed from the toxic pressure and constant humiliations doled out by Derek and Morgan, responded with a level of efficiency I hadn't seen since the factory's early years. Overtime was covered without complaints, and production spiked by 15% in the first month. But while the inside of the blue corrugated fortress flourished, the outside world of my children was collapsing with the speed of an avalanche. It was a Tuesday, almost 2 months after my hospitalization, when Arthur returned to the factory. He wasn't carrying his usual black briefcase, just a simple manila folder. He walked into my old office, which had now been cleaned and restored to its former Spartan glory. Outside, through the window overlooking the floor, you could see the new German machine running at full capacity. He handed me the folder across the desk. "It's the final report from commercial court, Evelyn," the lawyer said, sitting down with an exhausted sigh. "Your kid's management company has formally filed for bankruptcy." I didn't open the folder right away. I stared at the wooden surface of my desk. "Tell me yourself, Arthur. Detail by detail." Arthur adjusted his glasses. It was a textbook implosion. When Commerce Bank canceled their bridge loan that morning, they were left with zero instant cash flow. Derek tried to sue the trust, arguing that revoking the bailment was abusive, and filed for an injunction to get the machines back. But the judge saw your notarized signature, reviewed the unconditional revocation clause they themselves signed 3 years ago without reading, and dismissed the suit in the first instance. He told them they had no standing to claim assets that were never theirs. "And what happened to their personal accounts?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "That's where the real disaster hit," Arthur continued, crossing his legs. "Turns out Derek and Morgan had been financing their lifestyle under the assumption that the factory would always cover the gaps. They co-signed personal guarantees to buy the imported cars, to pay the HOA fees on their downtown condos, and to maintain premium credit lines. Without the operating company to siphon funds from, the banks descended on them like vultures." Arthur paused, gauging my reaction. Seeing my expression hold firm, he pressed on. "Derek's Audi was repossessed 3 weeks ago right outside his country club. He had to move into a 1-bedroom apartment in a sketchy neighborhood, rented under a friend's name because his own credit score is destroyed. Morgan tried selling her designer bags and branded jewelry online to pay a labor lawyer, threatening to sue you for wrongful termination. No serious lawyer took the case because, technically, they were the owners of the bankrupt company, not your employees. In the end, Morgan had to hand her SUV's keys back to the financing company and temporarily move in with Derek. Silence filled the office, broken only by the dull, rhythmic hum of the machinery on the ground floor. I felt a pang in my chest. This time it wasn't a coronary failure, it was grief. A peculiar, bitter grief. I was mourning the death of the illusion of perfect motherhood. I had spent my entire life trying to build an impenetrable shelter so my kids would never know the cold of the real world, the cold I had felt when their father abandoned us. But by giving them everything and demanding nothing, I had turned them into arrogant parasites. Morgan called my firm yesterday. Arthur murmured, breaking the silence with tact. She was crying inconsolably. She asked me to intercede with you. She said they were willing to apologize, that they needed a minimal personal loan just to eat and keep the lights on in the apartment. She asked if you were willing to see them. I looked up at the lawyer. My mind instantly traveled back to that hospital bed, to the peeling paint, the smell of iodine, the sound of the old man coughing to my left. I remembered the ease with which they had canceled my private room to save a few bucks, the coldness with which they had decided my suffering was an unacceptable operating cost. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her I am solely your financial legal counsel, not your confessor, and I informed her that any communication must be done in writing through the firm. They haven't sent anything. You did well, Arthur. I am not going to see them. Evelyn, they are your children. They are on the street. Technically, you've left them destitute. No, Arthur, make no mistake. I corrected him, my voice taking on an iron firmness. I did not leave them on the street. I simply stopped paying the rent on their fantasy. They made the financial decisions that ruined them. They believed the world was an infinite ATM. Now they are discovering what it truly means to optimize resources. Arthur nodded slowly, understanding that my decision was irrevocable. Mercy, when applied to someone who has no redemption, is just a form of prolonged cruelty. And what are you going to do with the factory now? The lawyer asked, changing the subject, looking for safer ground. Valerie's projections show you'll break revenue records this year. But you're 71, Evelyn, and your heart already gave you a very serious warning. You can't keep driving this monster by yourself forever. I know, I replied, turning my chair to look through the glass down at the factory floor. I am not immortal, but now I know that blood is no guarantee of loyalty or competence. I am putting together a new framework. Valerie is going to be the CFO. Finn was just named manager of tech operations. And Isaac has a granddaughter, Chloe. She just graduated with a degree in industrial engineering. I hired her last week. She's down there right now, learning how to calibrate the die cutters, getting her hands dirty with grease, exactly like I did 35 years ago. If she proves she has the mettle, the trust will transition into a cooperative managed by them when I'm gone. The empire will stay in the hands of the people who know how to keep it alive. Arthur smiled with genuine admiration, closed the manila folder, and stood up. You are a force of nature, Evelyn. Take care of that heart. We need it beating for a long time. We shook hands, and I watched him leave, walking down the iron staircase, dodging forklifts with the familiarity of someone who knows the house. Months later, winter gave way to a warm spring that managed to slip through the massive skylights in the tin roof. It was Friday afternoon, almost closing time for the shift. The factory vibrated with that specific energy that precedes the weekend break. I was standing in the center of the loading yard, alone. I was wearing my old blue wool coat and holding a chipped ceramic mug filled with bitter black coffee. I watched as the last cargo truck rolled through the main gate, now guarded by shiny new steel padlocks, carrying thousands of perfectly assembled boxes toward the port. The sun was starting to set behind the industrial chimneys of the neighborhood, dyeing the sky a coppery orange. The pain in my chest was barely a distant memory, a tiny invisible scar that throbbed occasionally, just to remind me I was alive. I took a sip of the coffee. The breeze blew, carrying the unmistakable sour scent of industrial glue mixed with damp asphalt. It was the perfume of my life, the aroma of my independence. My children had thrown me into a general ward hoping anonymity and misery would consume me in silence, hoping my pride would break under the weight of indignity. They didn't understand that for someone who built her kingdom from nothing, there is no humiliation in hitting rock bottom. There is only solid ground to push off of and jump again. I turned around and walked slowly toward the pedestrian door of my factory. I closed my eyes for a second, listening to the echo of the machines powering down one by one, and smiled in the fading light. The silence finally belonged entirely to me.